He thought the Apache girl just needed warmth for the night, but her silence carried storms. The wind had been screaming down the canyon for hours, tearing at the seams of Nayati Redhawk's canvas tent, dragging the cold through mesquite branches and dry brush. The fire he built before sundown was now nothing more than a low bed of fading coals beneath half-fallen sticks. The pot of beans had long since gone cold. The light barely reached the corners of the tent. Nayati sat with his back braced against the rear pole hat, slouched low shoulders folded into his old cavalry coat. A Henry rifle rested across his lap barrel, aimed square at the flap. He wasn't anxious, but no part of him was truly at ease either. Too many camps, too many nights like this. The war had taught him never to fully let his guard down. He'd been out of the army 4 years. Since then, it was just him moving trap lines, trading hides, avoiding towns, unless he needed powder or beans. The ghosts of burned-out villages, the screams and the silence that followed, still lived in the hollow of his gut like rotting meat. He'd stood there during those campaigns pretending he hadn't seen what he saw. Out here, he didn't have to answer for any of it. Didn't have to speak. That was the point. He was chewing on the last piece of a hard biscuit when the tent flap stirred not with thunder, but with a soft snap of wind, and a hand. He opened his eyes in an instant. His grip tightened on the rifle, but he didn't shift. Years had trained him to wait. 1 breath, 2. Then he saw her. A shape crouched low, slipped through the flap and paused just inside. The light reached her legs first. Bare scratched, dust-caked. Then the rest of her. A wool blanket hung crooked across her frame, burned at one corner, stained with ash. Her hair clung to her face in tangled black strands, wet from sweat or tears or both. She was shivering, trying not to show it. Nayati didn't lower the rifle. Not yet. She didn't speak. Didn't beg. Didn't cry. She just stood there, crouched, clutching the blanket like it might be all she had left. Her eyes were wide, but dry. She looked like someone who'd already accepted the possibility this man could hurt her, but also knew she had nowhere else to go. He studied her. His voice came low, flat. "You alone?" She gave a small nod. Her chin trembled. "Fire's about dead," he said. "You bring it with you." Still nothing. Her eyes dropped, not out of weakness, but maybe shame. Or cold. Probably both. He lowered the rifle but didn't put it down. Reached behind and pulled out a spare blanket, thin wool torn at the hem, but better than the burnt one she wore. He extended it. She didn't move forward. Just stared at his hand legs shaking now from cold or sheer willpower. He let it fall at her feet. After a long breath, she bent to pick it up. Her knees buckled slightly. The sound she made was more pain than relief. She didn't choose closeness. She crossed the space, settling near the edge of the fire pit. Cross-legged, eyes low, wrapped now in both blankets. The flap swung closed behind her. Nayati said nothing more. Neither did she. The silence stretched thick between them, not awkward, just taut like stretched hide. He leaned back again, watching her through flickering shadows. She had to be Apache. The shape of her, the way she moved, he knew it. But he didn't ask. Didn't need to. Not after what he'd seen in the war. She looked young, mid-20s maybe, thin from hunger but not frail, bones like carved cedar, shoulders that had borne more than one harsh season. He looked again at her feet, cracked, bleeding. She'd come a long way barefoot, which meant she'd either been desperate or hunted, or both. Nayati tightened his coat and stared deep into the fire. He knew what things could drive a woman like her this far into canyon country. Sometimes it was soldiers, Sometimes it was her own tribe. Sometimes it was worse. They didn't speak again that night, but something shifted. She didn't sleep, not right away, just stayed folded, blanket pulled tight, flinching at the pop of burning wood. One hand stayed hidden beneath the fabric. He figured there might be a blade there. Good. It meant she still had fight in her. She wasn't helpless. When she finally drifted off, it wasn't restful. It was the sleep of someone always half listening, curled in on herself like a child, jaw clenched, shoulders trembling even beneath both layers, and she never, not once, turned her back on him. Nayati Redhawk didn't sleep either, only watched. Not once did she turn her back to him, and Nayati Redhawk didn't close his eyes. Not that night. His thoughts stirred like gravel under river water. Why this tent? Why now? Why him? It gnawed at him like maybe the past was finally catching up. Not with bullets this time, but with people. With weight, the kind that didn't leave tracks. The fire had burned low. He added 2 dry sticks with practiced ease. The sound woke her. She shifted under the blankets, one slipping off her shoulder. That's when he saw it, a bruise dark and deep cutting across her collarbone. His jaw locked tight. But he didn't look away. She didn't wake, didn't move. The sun crawled slow over the canyon edge, pale and veiled in mist. When Nayati finally stood stretching with a grunt that barely broke the silence, she jerked awake, sat up fast, eyes wide, ready to bolt. "Easy," he said, voice calm, steady. "Just tending to the mules." She didn't say a word, but she didn't run either. He stepped out into the cold morning. The wind bit harder than the night before. He pulled on his gloves, tightened the scarf at his neck, and walked toward the tether line. Behind him he heard the tent flap rustle, but not open. She was still inside. That was enough. By noon the sky lightened, letting through a thin wash of winter sun across the canyon floor. Nayati crouched beside the fire pit outside the tent, coaxing flame from mule dung and dry twigs. Water had already been hauled from the creek. Beans were soaking. He didn't hear her step out, but he felt it. She moved slow, cautious, still wrapped in the blanket he'd given her. On her feet, pieces of torn canvas makeshift shoes cut from what he'd left by the fire the night before. She hadn't asked. She'd just taken them, which told him plenty. She didn't expect kindness, and didn't know what to do with it when it came. She crouched by the fire hands, hovering close to the flame. Her eyes never met his. She didn't speak. Nayati didn't push, didn't need to. He handed her a tin cup filled with wheat coffee. She hesitated, then took it in both hands, drinking slow. She didn't say thank you, but she drank every drop. That was enough. He watched how she moved, how she held the cup like it might vanish, how her eyes flicked to the rifle leaning against the stump, how her shoulders tightened when the wind kicked dust across the coals. She knew danger. That much was clear. But she hadn't run. Not in the dark, not at first light. That mattered too. "You got a name?" he asked, voice low. She didn't look up, but after a pause, her lips moved. "Selu," she whispered, voice barely there. "Selu Rainbird." He nodded once. "Nayati." She didn't repeat it, just stored it somewhere behind her eyes. He didn't ask more. He'd learned long ago not to pull stories from people who hadn't offered them freely. But he was building a picture. She was young, 24, maybe younger, but her eyes held weight like old scars. Not wanderer's weariness. No, this was something else. Cast out. abandoned. And he hadn't seen fresh tracks in days. No soldiers, no traders, no hunting parties. Oh, whatever happened to her, it wasn't last night. And if someone was still chasing her, she wouldn't have slept near a fire. Wouldn't have dared. She wasn't running now, just drifting. After the meal, he said he was going to check the traps. She didn't say a word, just stood and followed. He heard her before he saw her, the crunch of gravel, the whisper of her shadow stretching behind his. She kept a few paces back, but never strayed. When he crouched beside a snare, she mirrored him. Close, but not in the way. One trap held a hare. Another had nothing but a snapped twig. He reset them both, silent. At the third, she stepped forward, hand out, motioning for the knife. He studied her fingers, slender, but scarred palms calloused. She was no stranger to blade work. He handed it over. She knelt, cut the wire, cleaned the hair, with swift, practiced movements, and wrapped the meat in a scrap of canvas. When she gave back the blade, she met his eyes. No thanks in that look. Just judgment. Measured. Controlled. Still deciding if he was a man worth staying near. Back at camp, she skinned the rabbit without being asked. Laid the hide flat on a rock like she'd done it 1,000 times. He noticed how she moved, not like a servant, not like someone trained, but like someone who'd had to do it to survive. Survival passed down like stories, without choice, without rest. And Nayati Redhawk, who'd seen too many war camps, too many wounded eyes, watched her work and said nothing. Because something about her silence felt familiar. She moved like a woman who'd lived through too much to ever be idle again. While Nayati Redhawk tried patching a tear in his coat, the needle snapped halfway through. He muttered under his breath, let the fabric drop, and stood to dig through his kit for another. But before he found one, Selu Rainbird stood up. Without a word, she picked up the coat from where he left it, settled it in her lap, and pulled a small bone needle from a pouch tucked beneath her blanket. She unwound a bit of thread from the hem of her own wrap and started stitching the seam like she'd done it all her life. She didn't ask. She just did it. And Nayati didn't stop her. That night the fire burned a little longer than usual. She cooked the rabbit they'd snared with wild onions he'd foraged near the creek bed. The smell drifted between them, softening the cold in the tent. They ate without speaking. She didn't touch his rifle. He didn't ask her story. After the meal, once he'd fed the mules and made his last loop around the camp perimeter, she stood near the fire and lifted a hand toward the sky. "Storm," she said. He followed her gaze. Clouds were building fast over the ridgeline, darker than before. The wind was sharpening, too raw and cold. If snow came early, they'd be stuck here for days. He gave a short nod, tossed 2 more logs onto the fire, and ducked into the tent. She followed, crouching low under the flap, silent. Inside, she wrapped both blankets tight around her and sat near the coal's legs, drawn close, shoulders slumped with fatigue. Nayati peeled off his coat and boots, set his rifle beside him, and leaned back against the rear pole. They didn't exchange another word. But when the wind howled and the canvas groaned like it might give, she shifted not to run, but to move just close enough to feel the warmth off his shoulder. She flinched when a gust slammed the flap, but didn't pull away. And he didn't move. Let her set the space. Let her decide what felt safe. Later, after the fire had burned down to its final red pulse, she lay on her side, head on her arm lids half closed. And then, just before sleep claimed her, she whispered something so soft it barely reached him. "Why didn't you touch me?" The first night. Nayati stared into the dying glow, jaw tight. He didn't speak right away. Then low and plain he answered, "Because you didn't want me to." She didn't respond, just breathed out slow and closed her eyes. Something shifted in that space between them. Not trust, not yet, but something close. And for the first time in years, Nayati Redhawk let himself close his eyes while another soul was still awake beside him, because he knew Selu Rainbird wouldn't run. Not tonight. Not anymore. The storm came just before dawn, not with snow like she'd warned, but with sleet, sharp, frozen rain that hammered the canvas and turned the canyon floor into a slurry of red mud. Wind rocked the tent like a loose barn door. Inside, their breath clouded in the air. Selu curled tight into a ball near the fire pit, blankets wrapped close to her chin. Nayati fed the coals 3 times just to keep the chill from eating into their bones. He didn't sleep. Not much. Even when his eyes shut, his ears stayed open. Every gust of wind made his hand twitch toward the rifle beside him. Not because someone was out there, but because some part of him always believed someone might be. By morning, the ground was nothing but wet mush. One of the mules had chewed through its tether and wandered uphill. Nayati followed the tracks, cursing under his breath, and spent nearly 2 hours dragging the stubborn beast back through freezing mud. When he returned, Selu was already tending the fire again. A pot steamed gently beside her. She was soaking herbs in hot water. He didn't ask where she'd found them. She hadn't left camp. Must have gathered them days earlier and kept them hidden in her things. She handed him a cup. The brew was bitter sharp with something unfamiliar, but it cut through the cold in his chest. He drank it all. Then he got to work sharpening his traps. She sat near the fire, rubbing her palms together for warmth. Then, without being told, she picked up a length of rawhide cord and began repairing one of the broken snare loops he hadn't gotten to yet. Nayati looked over once, then went back to his blade. They didn't need words. That much was becoming clear. Later that day, the storm eased off, leaving wet trails and slick stone behind. Nayati considered heading south toward Dragoon Pass, closer to the winter trade routes. But something rooted him here. Maybe it was the quiet way Selu mended his coat without asking, or how she stirred the pot just enough to keep the beans from sticking. Little things. Quiet things. But they carried weight. That afternoon, as they sat by the fire again, she finally spoke. Her hands were busy pressing soaked mesquite pods into paste with the side of a dented tin can. Her voice was soft eyes on her work. "My people," she said, "they say I bring misfortune." Nayati didn't lift his eyes from the rabbit he was cleaning, but he listened. "They said the sickness came because I stayed after the child died. Said I brought the storm. Said I cursed the traps. The horses that ran. The empty pots." She paused. "They called me cursed." He didn't look at her, but he didn't need to. He'd heard those words before, not in her voice, but in others, in the war, in his own past. And sometimes the worst wounds didn't leave scars on the skin, they sat heavy in the chest, like truth no one wanted to carry. And he knew she'd been carrying it alone, for a long damn time. She didn't beg, didn't cry, just sat still by the fire and said it like a sentence carved into stone. "They left me in the dry hills," Selu Rainbird said. "No shoes, no food." Her voice faltered then barely, but she pushed through it. "They took my little brother, said he'd do better without me." Nayati Redhawk's jaw flexed as he finished slicing the rabbit meat and set the knife aside, slow and deliberate. How old is he? He asked. 7, she murmured. He gave a short nod. You know where they took him? She shook her head. Some mission, she said, near the trading post. They say the priest there. He takes kids and doesn't bring them back. The words sat between them like dead weight. Nayati didn't offer comfort, he didn't know how. But when he finally looked at her, really looked, he didn't see fear in her face. He saw steel, not sorrow, not defeat, just a quiet resolve. That night, she didn't curl up like before. She lay beside him under the same blanket, her back resting inches from his chest. Not touching, but close enough he could feel her breath rise and fall. Slow, steady. She didn't flinch when the fire snapped, didn't jump when the wind slammed into the canvas. She stayed there. And he kept his eyes open, staring up at the ceiling like it might answer something he hadn't asked out loud. His thoughts circled that mission. He'd passed it once, months ago. White walls, a sun-faded cross, and children with heads shaved clean and eyes that didn't blink enough. Boys who stared straight ahead like they weren't really looking at anything. He remembered the priest's voice slick as river stone. He remembered the way the man looked at those Apache boys, like they were half-wild pups to be broken in. He hadn't liked it then. Now he hated it. He didn't say it out loud, but the decision had already settled like a stone in his gut. If the boy Tahoma Little Elk was there, he'd bring him back. Not for redemption, not for peace, just because it was the right damn thing to do. At first light, he handed Selu a pair of thick wool socks and spoke only once. Pack light. We move after breakfast. She didn't question. Didn't thank him. Just stared at him for a long time, really seeing him. Then she nodded. Not a girl anymore. Not a guest in someone's tent. But a woman walking beside him. Maybe by the end of this, something like family. Not by blood, but by choice. By staying. They broke camp before the sun cracked the sky. Nayati didn't speak much, he rarely did. But everything in the way he moved said one thing clear: this trail wouldn't be turned back on. He packed only the essentials. Dry beans, a pouch of coffee. His traps rolled tight, his Henry rifle, and the last of the rabbit meat wrapped in worn cloth. Selu rolled the tent canvas, tied it down with steady hands, while Nayati loaded the mule. She didn't ask where they were headed. She didn't need to. He'd already said enough just by saying, "We're going." The trail south was little more than a memory through old game routes and rock-slick ledges left muddy from the storm. Nayati walked ahead, reins in hand boots, sure on the shifting stone. Selu followed close. Her feet wrapped in moccasins he'd dug from his pack the night before, worn leather stitched from someone else's winter. They were too big. She never said a word about it. By mid-morning, the clouds began to break. A pale sun pushed through, casting long, cold shadows across the canyon walls. Overhead hawks rode the updrafts, silent and watching. Nayati stopped once, listened to the wind, then veered west off the trail without a word. They crossed a dry wash, climbed a low ridge to avoid a fallen cottonwood boots crunching over frost-hardened stone. When they reached the top, the land opened wide beneath them. Flat basin country stretched far to the south, broken only by scattered cottonwoods and a single thin plume of smoke curling on the horizon. The mission. They didn't speak, but the silence between them carried weight, because both of them knew whatever waited ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. And that made all the difference. By the time the sun dipped low behind the canyon rim, they'd found shelter, a half-collapsed line shack, weather-beaten, but dry enough to hold against the chill. Nayati Redhawk tethered the mules to a post out front, then ducked inside and started a fire using broken rafters pulled from the sagging roof. Selu Rainbird unpacked their few supplies, sorting them in practiced silence, while he worked the last knots from a coil of snare wire. When the fire caught, strong and steady, she settled beside it. Legs folded beneath her shadows, softening the edges of her face, for the first time in days. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, voice hushed but clear. Nayati didn't answer right away. He was checking the stock of his Henry fingers running over a crack near the grip. "Would have done the same for anyone caught in that storm," he said eventually. She tilted her head, unconvinced. "Not the first night." That made him glance up, not at her, but at the space beside her. His jaw set. "I've seen enough camps to know when a woman's asking for shelter and when she expects to be taken," he said, no bitterness in his tone. "Just truth plain as sand and sky." Selu stared into the fire. "You never asked anything of me. Still haven't." He gave a slight shrug. "Doesn't make me good." "You're not bad either," she said quietly. He didn't answer. Just went back to checking the rifle. Later, after they ate, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Unwrapping it, she revealed a carved bone token, worn smooth with time. Apache markings, simple and old. "My brother made this," she said, holding it out, "before they took him. If that priest still has him, he'll know this sign." Nayati turned it over in his hand. A circle split at the top, the symbol for a hot cry. He gave one firm nod and slid it into his pocket. That night, as the flames dimmed to a low amber glow, she sat a little closer. Not touching, but close enough he could hear her breath, steady and slow. When he pulled the blanket across them both, she didn't flinch. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. There was no urgency between them. No fear. Just something wordless, a quiet understanding between two people choosing to walk the same road. By morning, they were moving again. The land flattened as they drew closer to the mission. Sagebrush gave way to wagon ruts, and rail fences turned gray by wind and time. In the distance, faint laughter echoed children. Selu's jaw tightened. Her fingers gripped the edge of her shawl. "We're going in together," she said low. Nayati glanced at her. "All right, but if he sees you and tries to take you back, he won't," he said, calm but unshakable. They reached the edge of the mission just as the midday bell rang. The courtyard was full half-starved Pueblo boys being herded by an older woman with a switch, a drunk trader passed out beneath his wagon. Buck Hollowstone, most likely, and a priest stood near the well, sleeves rolled, chatting with a townsman. Nayati stepped forward slow and steady. His rifle was slung across his back in plain sight. His boots struck the dirt with the kind of rhythm that drew eyes. The priest turned. He was younger than Nayati remembered. Clean coat, slick hair, and a polished smile that stopped just short of the eyes. "Can I help you, friend?" he asked, voice soft. "I'm looking for a boy," Nayati said. "Apache. Name's Tahoma Little Elk. About 7. Might have come through here weeks back." The priest raised an eyebrow. "We've taken in many orphans. I'd need to check the logs." Selu stepped forward. She didn't say a word, just held out the bone token. The priest's expression flickered. Then the smile returned. "Ah, that one. Yes, he's here." Nayati's jaw clenched. "Bring him. Perhaps we could speak in my office." Now Nayati set his voice cold as stone. Something in his tone, flat and final, made the priest falter. He nodded and turned to call out. Moments later, a small boy was led out by another woman, Nita Willow, by the look of her. His clothes were clean, but hung too loose. His hair had been sheared short, but the face. Same angular jaw. Same eyes as Selu. The boy froze when he saw her. Then he ran. Selu dropped to her knees and caught him in her arms. He clung to her, sobbing into her shoulder. She wept, 2 silent gasps pressed into his neck. Nayati looked away. Let them have the moment. Then the priest cleared his throat. You can't just take him. There are forms. Custody rules. Nayati Redhawk stepped in closer to the priest, his voice flat as the desert floor. He's not yours, he said. And you think he belongs to you? The man shot back. Nayati didn't bother with an answer. He reached into his coat, drew out a folded paper, and held it out. The priest unfolded it and read. It was an Army Southern District trade permit stamped and signed by a quartermaster Nayati had once ridden under. Not custody papers exactly, but a clause that gave him authority to relocate any tribal youth for protection. Enough to put a chill in a man like Elias Blackfeather. The priest stepped back. Fine, but he's your responsibility now. Nayati didn't respond. He turned and started walking toward the gate. Behind him, Selu Rainbird followed her arms full with the boy Tahoma Little Elk, clutching her like a lifeline. They didn't speak until they were clear of the mission walls. Only then did she catch her breath and murmur, You didn't have to do that. Nayati kept walking. Yeah, I did, he said. Because the past doesn't fix itself. You have to choose to do better. The air shifted the moment they left the grounds, not the weather, but the silence, the heavy kind that comes after a decision's been made and the weight hasn't landed yet. Tahoma had stopped crying, but clung to Selu's sleeve like a vine to stone. In one hand, he still held the carved bone token. He hadn't let go since she gave it back. Nayati walked a few steps ahead, eyes scanning the horizon, boots cutting a slow rhythm through the brittle grass. His thoughts were loud enough to drown out the wind. He kept seeing Elias Blackfeather's face, that oily smile straining to hold. He hated men like that. Men who dressed control up as mercy. That boy hadn't just been kept there, he'd been shaped. Hair shorn, tongue stolen, clothes too clean, spirit bent. They made camp an hour before sundown near a dry arroyo lined with mesquite. Shelter was simple canvas draped over 2 mules pinned with rocks. Selu built the fire, while Nayati walked a slow perimeter. He set 2 snares, though he doubted anything would come. Routine was a kind of prayer, it steadied his hands. When he came back, Selu was mashing beans in the pot with the back of a spoon. Tahoma sat across from her knees, pulled up, eyes wide. He hadn't spoken since the mission, but he was watching everything. Is he always that quiet? Nayati asked, setting his rifle down. Selu glanced at her brother. He used to talk. He'll come back to it. He remembered me. She nodded once. They told him I was dead. Nayati didn't comment, just sat down near the fire and poured himself coffee. Tahoma stared at him, unblinking. After a long minute, the boy spoke, voice hoarse and unsure. Are you the soldier? Nayati looked up. Selu stiffened. Was he said slowly? Not anymore. The boy didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the rifle leaning beside Nayati. You afraid of me? Nayati asked, plain and direct. Tahoma didn't reply, but his eyes dropped, and he pressed closer to his sister. Selu laid a hand on his head. He doesn't need to be afraid, she said softly. You didn't hurt anyone today. You did the opposite. Nayati didn't know what to do with that, so he just nodded and stirred the fire. After they ate, Selu began brushing dirt from Tahoma's feet, wiping his soles with the edge of her blanket. Nayati watched her movements, the patience in her hands, the way her voice softened when she spoke in their own tongue. The boy leaned into her like he'd just remembered what safety felt like. When Tahoma fell asleep curled against her, Selu looked up. You could have walked away, she said. I could have, Nayati said quietly, but I didn't. He poked at the coals. Sometimes you don't walk because the road back's worse. She studied him for a long moment. Then softly, You've done things. He didn't answer right away. Things I don't talk about. I know what kind of things she said, no accusation, just knowledge. I saw a soldier burn a storehouse, shot a man who ran back inside for corn. I was hiding behind a woodpile. I was 8. Nayati looked at her not with pity, but with the heavy recognition of someone who'd carried the same weight. I was there, he said. Not that one. But others. Selu nodded. You didn't have to say it. I did, he answered. She shifted, sitting a little closer now, and the firelight flickered between them, 2 people who'd been on opposite ends of the same war, now breathing the same cold night air. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a wound between them. It felt like truth. Her voice fell into a hush. My people looked at me after what happened and said it was punishment that I should have died with the rest. That staying alive meant the spirits had turned their backs on me. Nayati Redhawk watched the flicker of the firelight dance across her face. That why they turned away from you? He asked. Selu Rainbird gave a single nod. They said I carried the shadow of the dead. The silence that followed didn't feel heavy this time. It felt mutual, like 2 burdens leaning into each other. You don't, he said simply. She met his gaze, her eyes steady, clear. You carry your own weight, she whispered. Same as I do. She didn't blink for a long while. Then slowly she reached out and touched the edge of his sleeve. Just the worn fabric between them. Nothing more. You think we can build something out here? She asked. After everything we've been through. We already are, he replied. We just haven't put words to it yet. That night when she curled beside him again, it wasn't the cold that drew her close. He didn't reach for her, didn't pull her in, but he didn't move away either. Her breath warmed the space between them, her hand resting gently near his collarbone. Outside the canyon, wind had quieted. Tahoma Little Elk didn't cry in his sleep. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Nayati didn't dream of fire. They traveled slow the next morning, not because they were cautious, but because there was no longer any place they were rushing toward. Tahoma clung to his sister's waist on the pack, mule cheek resting against her back, eyes half closed. His small hands gripped tight to her belt, like a child who had been lost and finally found something that wouldn't leave. Nayati walked beside them, reins in one hand, his Henry rifle slung over his shoulder. His boots stirred up dust as they crossed the narrow gulch west of the dry wash, the same trail he'd walked months before when he still rode alone. But he didn't feel like that man anymore. They made camp just before the sun dipped under a rocky ledge where wind broke clean above. A place Nayati remembered dry, protected with a natural fire pit surrounded by flat stones. He cleared the area, while Selu unpacked their supplies. Tahoma gathered twigs without being told. The boy still didn't talk much, but he listened, stayed close to his sister's side, and never missed a detail. Later, as the fire cracked and spat softly, Selu pulled the rabbit bones from the pot and handed Nayati his share. He took it with a nod, noticing the way her hands moved now steadier, stronger. This wasn't survival anymore. It was life. They ate in a comfortable silence until Selu looked across the fire. "Why here?" she asked. "Why this canyon?" Nayati wiped his hands on a strip of cloth, tossed the bones into the flames. "It's quiet," he said. "Doesn't ask too much of a man. Folks only come here if they're searching for something." She met his eyes. "And what were you looking for?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into the fire like maybe the truth was buried somewhere in the coals. Finally he spoke. "A place where I didn't have to keep answering for things I can't change." She didn't try to fix it with soft words. She simply met honesty with honesty. That's what I came looking for, too. Later that night, with Tahoma curled beneath a thick blanket, his feet tucked near the saddlebag, Nayati sat sharpening his knife by the glow of the fire. Selu braided her hair over one shoulder for the first time in front of him. Before it had always hung wild, untamed, like someone not sure they'd make it to the next dawn. She studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "You still carry it, don't you? What happened during the war?" He didn't look up. "It's not something you just set down. Not all the way. So what do you do with it?" "Try not to be that man anymore," he said. "If I can't fix what I did, I can at least keep it from happening again." Selu nodded slowly. "You've already done that." He looked up at her, truly seeing her. "You saying that? It means something." She reached into the pouch tied to her belt, pulled out a small needle and a frayed bit of thread. "Your coat's still torn," she said, gesturing to the rip near his elbow. He slipped it off and handed it to her without a word. She took it, gently mended the seam in silence, while the fire snapped and sparked. When she was done, she folded the coat and held it out. But she didn't release it just yet. "I know you didn't ask for this," she said. "Me, Tahoma, any of it." "I didn't ask for a lot of things," Nayati said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I don't want them now." The way Selu Rainbird looked at him just then. Steady, quiet, unwavering. It wasn't a question, but something close. Nayati Redhawk didn't speak at first. He just inched closer, slow and careful not to startle her, just to be near. She didn't pull away. Her hand rested on the coat between them, fingers barely grazing his. The silence lingered a while. Then finally he spoke, his voice low and firm. "If you stay, I'll build more than fire and canvas. I'll find timber, raise us real walls, put a roof over your heads." He held her gaze. "And if I stay," she said, "I cook at first light. I make medicine when Tahoma coughs. And I sleep beside you because I want to." His throat tightened. He nodded once. "Then I want you to." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder. Her hair fell over his chest like a soft blanket. He didn't move. Just let her stay there still, as the land around them. Outside the desert, wind changed again, gentler now. Later that night, she curled into his chest, her arm slung over his ribs. Tahoma little elk. Half asleep, inched closer too, one small hand resting on Nayati's boot like a child claiming his place. No one kept watch that night. There was no danger to outrun and nowhere else to be. Nowhere. By morning they rode deeper into the canyon. The old trail narrowed between rock slopes and rabbit tracks. But Nayati knew where he was headed, an old line station tucked tight against the cliff, forgotten since the cavalry stopped riding these parts. The roof had caved in. One wall had fallen, but the stone base held strong. Water was close, firewood was plenty. It could be something again. He paused on the ridge mule reins in hand, looking down at the clearing. Selu came up beside him. Tahoma gripped her hand quiet, but more open now, speaking in soft whispers, even answering Nayati in short nods, but always stayed close. She followed Nayati's gaze. "This where you want to build it?" He nodded. "Still some good stone left. Might take time to fix the roof, but it's a start." She didn't ask questions, just said, "Then we better dry the meat while there's still sun." That was it. No speeches, no promises, just a shared knowing. By noon they had unpacked. Tahoma hauled stones to ring the cook fire. Selu rigged the canvas for shade. Nayati dug out the old root cellar. They worked until the sun dipped. No one complained. Every step had purpose now. By the second day's end, upright logs stood braced with rope and stone. Selu boiled sinew to tie beams. Tahoma packed clay in the wall gaps to block the wind. Nayati's hands bled from the work, but he didn't stop. That night, as firelight danced across half-raised walls, they sat close. "This feel like home?" Selu asked, brushing wood shavings off her skirt. Nayati stared into the fire. "Feels like a place that could be better than tents. Better than running." Tahoma slept nearby, curled tight in a wool blanket, his head on a sack of beans. Selu leaned closer, arms crossed against the cold. "When I was little," she said, "they told me a man couldn't belong to land unless he was born on it." She paused. "Now I think, maybe belonging's something you build, not something you're given." Nayati didn't speak, just reached for her hand. She took it, and they sat like that, backs against the new wall, fingers twined beneath the stars. The night air stilled. It felt like the canyon itself was breathing softer. Next morning, Tahoma was building a chimney out of sticks and stones. Nayati crouched beside him, watched the boy place a flat rock on top. "Is this ours now?" the boy asked. Nayati gave a half-smile. "It is, if we keep working for it." Selu stepped into the clearing with a basket of wild onions and mesquite pods. "Then we better not quit," she said. By week's end, 4 walls stood. No door yet, but the wind didn't bite as sharp. Inside there was a bedroll, a corner for food, and a tiny place where Tahoma arranged 2 stones and a stick, maybe someday a table. That night the boy asked if he could sleep closer to Nayati. And no one said no. Not out of fear, but comfort. Selu Rainbird watched her voice as soft as a breeze through cedar needles. "You gave him that," she murmured. What Nayati Redhawk asked, that steadiness. He didn't reply, just pulled the blanket higher over Tahoma Little Elk's shoulders, letting the boy sleep unbothered. Later, when Selu lay beside him, her breath barely a whisper against his chest, she asked, "Do you ever wonder why it had to be us?" "No," he said simply. "I only care that it is." For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to forget the man he'd been. He was trying to become someone worth staying for. The wind turned colder, sweeping down from the north with a sharper bite. Frost painted the brush silver every dawn, and their breath hung like smoke long after sunrise. The walls they'd raised held back the wind, but not the cold, so the fire never died. Tahoma began waking before dawn without being asked. He'd gather kindling, shake frost off the canvas, feed the fire like it was a duty etched into him. No one told him to. He just did it. They weren't just surviving anymore. They'd built a rhythm, a life. Selu planted winter onions in a warm patch near the west wall, where the sun lingered longest. If we make it through the freeze, she'd said, the land'll give us more come spring. Nayati explored deeper into the ridge, found pine for beams, a frozen creek to pull ice from, a fox den to steer clear of. He was always busy cutting, mending, hammering. But at night, beside her, he was still. and they no longer lay side by side like strangers. There was no space between them anymore. His arm cradled her head. Her fingers rested lightly across his ribs. Her breath warmed his neck. It wasn't about possession. It was about choosing to stay near. That night after supper, Nayati checked the new doorframe, again crude but sturdy, held together with salvaged wood, and a hinge pried off an old wagon axle. It held. Tahoma was already asleep near the fire, hand tucked under his cheek. Selu stepped behind Nayati, slid her arms around his waist. "You never stop," she said. "Still things need doing," he replied, not turning. "I know," she whispered. "But can we talk? Before the dark takes all the light." He let her guide him back into the shelter's glow. They sat by the fire, knees touching. Her gaze didn't waver. "The first night I stepped into your tent," she said quietly, "I thought I'd have to trade myself just to not freeze." Nayati's jaw tightened, but he held her gaze. "I didn't think you'd let me stay unless I gave something up." "I remember," he said. "But you didn't ask," she said. "Not once. I'd never take what wasn't freely given." I know, she breathed, her hand rising to touch his cheek. "That's why I'm giving it now." She kissed him once, slow, sure, and true. No rush, no pretending. The kind of kiss that said, "I've seen your soul, and I still choose you." He kissed her back the same way, steady, honest, no apologies. When they finally parted, she rested her forehead to his. "I don't want to outlive you," she whispered. "I want to stay." He wrapped his arms around her like he'd been holding her in his bones since before he knew her. "You're not going anywhere," he said. Outside, the canyon wind whispered low through the brush, but the fire inside their walls didn't so much as flicker. Later, under the blanket curled tight together, Nayati didn't reach for his rifle. For the first time since the war, he slept unafraid. Just before her breath evened out, Selu whispered in the dark, "You don't owe me anything, Nayati, but I'm yours now." He didn't answer with words. He just stayed. Because sometimes love doesn't speak. It just stays. Winter didn't creep in, it struck. First frost in the mornings. Then came the snow. Thick, wet flakes that clung to stone and timber, piling against the shelter's sides, blanketing the canyon floor until even the pine trees looked tired. But inside they stayed warm. The cabin wasn't perfect, not by town standards, but it was theirs. Nayati had braced the roof with fresh pine beams. Selu had stuffed moss and dried reeds into the gaps between logs. They even dug a drainage trench to keep the runoff from soaking the bedding. The cold came. But they stayed strong. Together. Tahoma Little Elk stacked the dry wood behind the shelter, laying it neat in a crisscross pile. It wasn't fancy, but it worked, held the heat in, kept the fire steady through the nights. The bedroll was shared now, no hesitation, no need to explain. Each night ended the same. Selu Rainbird curled up beneath Nayati Redhawk's arm. Tahoma nestled near their feet, the wind howling outside, but never making it past their walls. No one spoke of leaving anymore. On the third morning, after the first heavy snow, Nayati stepped out, collar-turned high boots crunching across the hard crust of frost. He scanned the ridge eyes sharp for deer or fox. The snares had come up empty the last few days. They needed meat, sure, but for once he wasn't worried. There was something solid beneath him now. Not just the land, but this life, this shelter, this woman, her. He turned when the door creaked. Selu stepped out, wearing his old cavalry coat sleeves draping past her hands. Her breath puffed in mist, her cheeks pink from firelight, not cold. "You checking the traps?" she asked. Later he said, "Snow's too fresh. Nothing's stirred yet." She leaned into him, soft and quiet. For a moment, they stood side by side, watching the hush over the canyon. "I had a dream last night," she murmured. "I was back in Gray Mesa. Same faces, same whispers. But this time I didn't care. I had something they didn't." He glanced at her voice, low. "What's that?" She smiled gently. "A door that closed behind me. A fire that's mine. You." He exhaled, slow fingers finding hers, wrapping them in his grip. Inside, Tahoma stirred, the sound of blankets shifting, then his small voice. "Is it morning?" Selu turned. "It is." Nayati gave her hand one last squeeze, then stepped back inside. By noon they were at it again, working like always. Nayati split logs behind the shelter, while Selu stirred a pot of squirrel meat and roots over the flames. Tahoma busied himself gathering kindling and stacking stones for a new fire ring. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Later, as Selu sat near the fire, patching one of Tahoma's worn shirts, Nayati reached into his kit. From inside, he pulled out a folded piece of leather he'd carved on quiet nights when no one was watching. He ran his thumb across the pressed lines, then crossed the room and handed it to her. She opened it slow. It was a nameplate. Smooth hide, carefully etched lettering, Selu Tahoma Redhawk. Her eyes froze. Hands trembled slightly as she traced the letters. Then she looked up at him, unsure. "You can keep your name," Nayati said. "But if you want mine, it's yours." She set her needle down, stood without a word, and stepped into his arms. No tears, just a tight, full embrace, like she'd finally found the place she was meant to stay. From across the room, Tahoma looked up. "So, does that mean she's your wife now?" Nayati looked down at her. "If she wants to be." Selu didn't break her gaze. "I already was. Since the day you didn't ask me for anything." That night they lay beneath the roof Nayati had built, wrapped in a blanket Selu had sewn, warmed by the fire Tahoma had helped tend. No fear, no waiting for something to tear it all away. Just the wind outside, and 3 steady breaths close together, not from survival, but choice. And come morning they'd rise to build another day together. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.